Hey, welcome to the first episode of a new series I'm going to be calling Manga Club. As the name would imply, this is going to be me delving into manga that I've never read before and sharing my thoughts, hopefully having some good discussions and reading lots of fun stuff. The format for this series is going to vary slightly based on the kind of series that I'm reading, but for long-running manga, such as the one we're discussing today, the basic plan is to break these discussions up into the larger story arcs, at least to the best of my ability. And before we go anywhere with this, I just want to say sorry if you see me continuously looking down at the script or anything like that. I'm really not used to making these kinds of videos, and I'm still trying to get a hang of it, so just try to bear with me. But anyway, I guess we should just go right into the topic we're talking about today, which is JOJO'S Bizarre Adventure Part 1, Phantom Blood. So JoJo is undoubtedly one of the most iconic manga and anime of all time. Its iconography and artistic style is unlike almost anything else, and the grip and influence it's had in and outside of anime communities is undeniable. Despite this, I honestly knew legitimately next to nothing going into this. I knew some of the popular characters' names like Dio and Jotaro. I knew the most memed on songs like Roundabout and Giorno's theme. I knew that there was some kind of magical thing that everyone loves called a stand. Side note on that, I still don't know what a stand is. But aside from those fairly arbitrary standalone elements, I was in the dark. I didn't know the plot, I didn't know what the characters were like, I didn't even really know the tone of the series. That being said, it was impossible to go in with absolutely no expectations just based on the tremendous following that the series has. But I'd consider this about as close as you can get to a completely blind, clean slate introduction to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So, with that knowledge, what did a total and complete newcomer like me think about this first offering from the franchise? Well, let's talk about it. So JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, created by Hirohiko Araki, is a story about the titular JoJo, aka Jonathan Joestar, a boy from a wealthy family who lives with his father George. JoJo's life is soon shaken up by Dio Brando, another boy around JoJo's same age, who is sent to the Joestar's home by his dying father in hopes that George would take Dio in as a son. George does this, and while JoJo is amicable to the idea, Dio makes it exceedingly clear very early on that his intentions are not pure, as he hopes to drive JoJo out of the picture and become the heir to the Joestar fortune. To do this, he begins psychologically abusing JoJo, constantly demeaning and disrespecting him at every turn, doing everything from stealing his girlfriend's first kiss to murdering his dog? After flashing forward to see the antagonistic sort of rivalry relationship between the two grow, Dio poisons George in order to assure his death. Once JoJo proves Dio's guilt and attempts to get him arrested, Dio performs the ultimate act to prove his superiority. He brandishes an ancient stone mask and places it on his own face, transforming him into a vampiric beast. After meeting a collection of eccentric characters and learning of a magical fighting technique called the Haman, JoJo and his new acquaintances set off to find and defeat Dio before he can use his vampiric powers to become a tyrant to unsuspecting civilians. That's about it as far as plot goes. It's pretty simple without many divulging paths or subplots, and I would count that as being in its favor. Obviously, JoJo would grow to become a sprawling, lengthy adventure, which I'm sure would leave it plenty of time to develop interesting avenues of storytelling. But I actually think as the foundation upon which the rest of the series has to be built on top of, a straightforward narrative was a great choice in not getting too bogged down by complicated or convoluted writing. And honestly, that pretty much sums up the way I feel about this first part of JoJo in general. Simplistic, but a great foundation to build on. For example, the characters. There isn't a whole lot of nuance here, and I don't think there needed to be. JoJo is a steadfast hero with a heart of gold, and Dio is a maniacal villain with an evil soul. Basically, all the characters we're introduced to fall somewhere very closely in line with that binary that they set up. I've seen the complaint that JoJo is a boring character, and while I'm slightly inclined to agree, I also recognize the importance in the contrast between him and the evils he faces. Despite his moral simplicity, JoJo's journey towards becoming more and more powerful was a fun one to witness, especially when augmented by the characters around him. Now, when we mention the word boring, one character I wouldn't dare to utter in the same breath is Dio. Again, absolutely not nuanced at all. He is rotten to the core. But goddamn, is he just so good at it. His character is very much that of a devilish gentleman, dressing in eloquent attire and using proper language. That is, until he becomes angry, quickly shedding his classy exterior to show the monstrous rage really lying within. And hey, maybe I'm just a sucker for that kind of archetype, but my god, it was just so much fun reading through every scene that Dio is in. Whether it was him forcing a mother to become a zombie and eat her own child, or the ridiculous scene where he was nothing but a decapitated head in a glass container, somehow still wreaking havoc. Dio's just an absolute blast of an antagonist. Other notable mentions would be that of Baron Zapelli, a character who really embraces and provides a lot of the bizarre elements for which the series is named. His outrageous backstory, his strange way of speaking, his eccentric style, everything about him just feels right in a series called JOJO'S Bizarre Adventure. Plus, as the man who teaches JOJO about the magical Hamon techniques, his presence is what allows the many battles to elevate beyond simple fistfights, and that's very welcome. And I hate to say it, but the only character who I had frequent reservations about was Speedwagon. I did genuinely enjoy his relationship with JoJo, and I think he brings a very necessary lightheartedness to a lot of scenes. But unfortunately, far too often, he is simply delegated to the role of the one who stands on the sidelines and narrates the battles. When JoJo is already usually spelling out his thought process in thought bubbles, and especially when the paneling for the battle scenes is usually so detailed, I really did find that it took me out of the moment more often than I would have liked. It's a fairly minor gripe, I guess, but I felt it was worth pointing out because it definitely gives off the exact energy of old and tired shonen tropes, which is something that, given that this is such an old series to the point where some of these things wouldn't have even been established tropes at the time, I usually think it does really well in avoiding. I also mentioned Hamon before, and that's something else I'm very interested in going forward. I'm almost sure it will come up again in some fashion, and if so, I'm excited to see how it will either change or be iterated upon now that we've been introduced to it on a base level. The idea of Hamon being a breath-based technique and the way that the story utilizes that to create peril from its scenarios was really smart and really entertaining. As it stands, most of its use up to this point has been supercharging fists or weapons with a sort of magical breath lightning, or allowing humans to move in impossible ways like hovering around or moving crazy fast. There's quite a bit of off-the-wall, just absurd utility, and that kind of creativity further expanded and used to set up interesting encounters is something I'm really hoping to see more of going forward. The last thing I really want to call attention to is the art. If there is one thing JoJo is most well known for, it is the absolutely iconic artwork of Araki. It's pretty clear that he was still finding his footing drawing this first part, and it'd be some time before the series would truly develop the artistic identity it's known for nowadays. I mean, at some points, you could hold up images of JoJo Part 1 and Fist of the North Star, and they might as well be the same manga side by side. It definitely wears its influences on its sleeve. That's not to say there's nothing setting it apart, even this early on, though. For example, the infamous JoJo pose is in full effect already, especially by the end of the part. The way the characters will present themselves seemingly specifically for the reader as if they're like a model in a fashion magazine is almost theatrical, and it's really easy to see why this would become a defining aspect to many readers. Speaking of fashion models, some of this drip is absolutely insane, and it's another thing that really sticks out on every page. The manga is very indulgent in a Victorian sort of aesthetic, but it mixes it with some modern fashion sensibilities to create some very interesting and eye-catching clothing for the characters to wear. It really helps bring forth some colorful personality. The only other point to note is how gruesome this got at certain points, which is something that I did not expect. I don't know why I didn't expect it, but for some reason in my head, I didn't picture JoJo as a super graphic story. But on the contrary, Araki really doesn't hold back when it comes to showcasing the brutality of some of these fights. Characters surprisingly frequently get appendages just ripped clean off or sliced in half, and all the bloody details are shown right there for you to see. It makes a lot of the kills so incredibly visceral, especially when it's put right next to the extravagant camp of the majority of the work. it was just really well done. The ending of part 1 left me curious as to the future of the series and excited to go on to part 2. Even if it weren't for the prevalence of the franchise, the manga makes it quite obvious that Dio isn't done here. So I'll be absolutely delighted to see more of him, and I can't wait to find out who our next group of characters will be. I'm going to guess that Erina and the baby girl she saved during the ending will in some way be involved, but I don't really have a guess as to how. And if I were to have any specific hopes for the upcoming arcs, as I said before, just more of the interesting Hamon usage that's here would be really nice to see. And I think more than anything, I'm just hoping the cast gets a bit more breathing room to let their personalities show. For example, there are a few Hamon users that show up towards the second half of this part, and it's almost like by the time we start getting used to them, the climax of the story is already underway. Since part 2 is longer than this one, I hope it can circumvent this issue. Regardless of any of that though, I was satisfied by part 1 of this story, and I feel like I can now confidently call myself a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure fan. Once I've read part 2, I'll be sure to catch up with another one of these videos, but until then, I want to thank you for tuning into the first episode of Manga Club. As you can tell, these are mostly going to be shorter form, 10 to 15 minute videos, just sort of discussing the various things that stuck out to me while I was reading. One of my favorite parts about not only manga and anime, but basically any sort of media that I consume is the community aspect of it, discussing and talking and getting excited about stuff. So please, if you have anything to say that I didn't mention, or if there's anything you disagree about, or just want to discuss in general, go ahead and leave a comment. I really would love to talk about it. And those kind of discussions and that kind of community engagement is the kind of thing that I'm actually really hoping to create with this series. Just as a little sneak peek before I go, I want to mention that a couple of the other series that I'm probably going to make videos on this for pretty soon, at least as soon as I'm done reading the chapters that I would cover in one of these videos, is Chainsaw Man and One Piece. Yes, I am diving into One Piece headfirst in 2022. Pray for my soul. So yeah, be sure to stick around for next time if any of that sounds interesting to you or if you like this video. And I just want to say once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.